Trump administration has offered a number of explanations for why we're at war. But new reporting from MS Now casts doubts on the claim that Iran's nuclear program posed a threat to the United States. Quote, multiple nuclear scientists and nonproliferation experts told MS Now that the reactor does not have the capacity to serve as an easy conduit to a bomb, as asserted by the administration. The administration has yet to provide evidence or any intelligence to the public or Congress to back up its claims. But in a head-scratching turn today, Trump, yet again, took credit for crippling Iran's nuclear program.
If we didn't knock out their Iranian potential, if we didn't do that with Midnight Hammer, they would have had a nuclear weapon. They would have used it long before now.
Joining us now are Vaughn Hilliard, MS Now senior White House reporter, and Rachel Van Landingham, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and Judge Advocate General, and professor of law at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles.
Vaughn, the why here is what everybody wants to know. Walk us through your reporting.
The big question, and this took several days of reporting, understanding the justifications that this administration used to go into this war in the very first place. And two of the claims that they've made, number one was that there was 60% enriched uranium that was stockpiled by Iran. Our David Rode and Ian Sherwood, our colleagues, already reported last week that as part of the nuclear negotiations, Iran was willing to effectively relinquish that 60% uranium. Then there was the second tranche, which was the 20% enriched uranium, which Steve Witkoff and senior Trump administration officials were claiming that effectively they were stockpiling in order to build a nuclear weapon within 3 to 4 weeks, and that they were stockpiling it at the Tehran Research Reactor, which is the civil nuclear facility that was actually built by the U.S. 60 years ago in 1967 for electricity, medical isotopes. Well, based off of our conversations with a great many nuclear experts, they say, number one, that this particular reactor doesn't have that capacity, and that this was a misrepresentation by Jared Kushner to justify these actions, and that there is only further questions. And notably, the administration, despite several days of attempts, has yet to provide any evidence or intelligence of this sort of stockpiling at this particular enrichment facility, and they also have not presented this evidence to Congress either.
I have one follow-up on that. So your reporting is that the nuclear scientists, they themselves believe that Jared Kushner willfully misrepresented, knowingly?
Not so much knowingly or willfully, but this is the issue with their negotiations in the first place. In our reporting, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner made the decision to just the two of them, without nuclear technical American experts, to go into the negotiations. And so while there is deep questions about the extent to which Iran would be negotiating good faith, there were serious questions, especially Oman was there as the mediator, and questioned whether Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff understood the details of the nuclear
arrangements. If they had the expertise.
If they had the expertise.
Darryl Kimball, good non-government official here.
Darryl Kimball, executive director of the Arms Control Association, told me when it comes to nuclear nonproliferation discussions, the details matter, and working out the details requires time and technical expertise, and the administration was not patient enough to apply either to this effort. Those technical talks were supposed to take place that following Monday after the military strikes had already begun.
I don't even know what to even put on the table after that. I mean, you wonder why in Iran working through Oman, and Oman seemed to indicate before this all happened that things were on track to get a deal. And you've got Witkoff and Kushner at the table not understanding what's being negotiated, what the consequences are to the United States. And my whole point is I don't think any of that was relevant. I think he was there. They're there for the self-interest of the president, not the interest of the United States. That's just my view of it. And I'd be curious whether or not you've been able to glean anything further from that now that we're having conversations about sending U.S. men and women into a draft to go prosecute this war in Iran.
Well, and more to that point, Professor Van Landingham, whether or not sort of the rubber hits the road here with the lawyers where they have to have a justification for these actions.
Sure. I mean, the lawyers are going up to the top lawyers for the president, the top lawyers to the Pentagon. For war to be lawful, you have to have the evidence that it meets certain criteria. And if we can't trust what the administration is saying, how can the servicemen and women who are dying in prosecution of this war trust their entire chain of command that what they're doing is lawful, which stands for morality for our service members? And so I just want to commend Vaughn on his tremendous reporting here, because it really demonstrates, were these negotiations ever in good faith whatsoever? It's like going to NASA and saying, build me a rocket, without having a rocket scientist there. And so obviously, if the reporting is accurate, which it sounds like it is, that there wasn't any kind of nuclear, they weren't closer than this nuclear enrichment capability and the stockpiling that is being used as one of the many reasons for going to war. What else are we not being told the truth about?
You know, as a young millennial, I am just struck by the fact that at least the Bush administration went through the motions of trying to convince us all that there were weapons of mass destruction. We talked about this on Clock It on the podcast last week. They had hearings, there were these articles, they went before the UN. They tried to convince Congress and the American people and the international community that these things were there, which is why we have to go into this war. They are not even trying to convince us. They're not even giving us the courtesy of faking it.
And this is part of this is also the extent to which the strikes back in June effectively led to the IAEA inspectors all but leaving Iran completely. In this particular facility that we're talking about, actually had inspectors visiting it up until June of 2025.
The inspectors are the ones that make sure that they don't have the uranium higher than they're supposed to have.
Correct. And the folks that they're a little bit mystified, understanding that the U.S. is saying that they want to make sure that there's no nuclear weapons being developed inside of Iran. But under the JCPOA agreement struck by the Obama administration, there was access to inspectors. There was a 3.67% cap on in the enrichment capacity of uranium. And so a lot of what the demands of the president of the United States, including just tonight, saying that what is enough in terms of how far they're going to go in terms of their military effort, he says, where they're not going to be starting the following day to develop a nuclear weapon. So I think that really calls into question is where does this war end, but also to what extent are they going to use questionable justifications to move forward with military action elsewhere, for example.
At one point, Michael Steele was like, okay, Michael Steele is like,
I'm just listening to Vaughn. I defer to my colleagues.
Well, because Professor Van Landingham, we're all wondering what the checks and constraints are on this administration. They're going to go before Congress. They're going to ask them for an additional $50 billion. We'll see whether or not Republicans in Congress decide that they want to sign their name to that expense and to this war. The other check would be the legal authorities who have to sign off on these actions. And I just wish you could level set for us what this would ordinarily look like, the justification they would need to have in order to carry out these types of plans.
Sure. So normally the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice, with input from the General Counsel from the Department of Defense, would look at the legality under international and domestic law for going to war. There either has to be an imminent threat of armed attack or UN Security Council resolution under the UN Charter, or there could be an ongoing international armed conflict. That would be the argument that we've already been at war with Iran for over, at least a year, or we're joining with Israel in which they're already in an ongoing armed conflict. That argument really hasn't been strongly made because no one this last fall or winter thought the United States was at war with Iran. And so the idea that there was an imminent threat of armed attack, and that's been linked to this idea that there was nuclear weapons about to be developed in, the next 4 to 5 weeks, as Vaughn mentioned. And now we're saying, well, where's the evidence for that? And what we're really seeing is evidence that there was a meeting of Khamenei, and which was serendipitous to be able to target and lethally and to take out the entire, a certain level of the regime. That was the emergency. That's not an imminent threat under international law. And it's just demeaning and offensive to the American people not to actually lay out these kind of justifications and to the men and women who are serving to say, okay, these legal thresholds have been met. The sycophants that are at OLC and at the OGC for Department of Defense, they will tell President Trump he can do anything he wants, right? They say international law doesn't matter. So they're not even attempting to make much of a legal justification. There was a memo, Alicia, that was sent to Congress by the president early last week under the War Powers Resolution, and it doesn't even mention imminent threat. So they're not even, as Simone accurately said, they're not even playing the game. So Congress, I mean, a draft, really, we're going to have a draft and Congress is just going to sit there and say, go for it without any kind of really legitimate, well laid out, thoughtful explanation for what the heck we're doing. The American people don't want to die by a nuclear weapon launched from Iran. The American people don't want Israel or any other country threatened with nuclear weapons by Iran or any other kind of weapons. So the American people are not stupid. They just want to be shown what the facts are, because that's what law requires. That's what appropriate use of power requires. Show us the facts that justify what you're saying and actually come up with one statement versus all these different reasons. And so it really gives me great pause, despite the fact that Iran was a murderous regime that killed up it sounds like 30,000 of its own people. It has threatened its neighbors. It has attacked Israel numerous times. But what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do this?